How's it going, everyone? Cup of Anime Joe here. And I had a few talking points I wanted to go over for the latest chapter of One Piece, which is 1113. And so here we are. And I'm going to start with Marcus Mars. He is now coming back down from Punk Records after realizing that he was bamboozled by Dr. Vegapunk. And with him coming back into the fray on Egghead, I do think there's a decent chance of him encountering and battling a group. What I've been thinking up until this point is maybe Zoro and Jinbei, although we kind of maybe need them with the rest of the crew and not to be delayed too much. But I do think it would be cool to see them go up against Mars. I especially think it would be cool to see Zoro go up against Mars because of the difficulty he generally has fighting ranged opponents. I mean, we saw this in Wano with King. And so, maybe Jinbei continues going, although, see, if that happened, then Jinbei would be going directly against his mission, which was to fetch Zoro. So I think no matter what happens, that they stay together. I do also see a possibility of Mars continuing to look for the source of the broadcast, because that seemed to be kind of what he was doing still. He was trying to find individual telepathic waves that would be coming from a Den Mushi to have created the broadcast. And this does make me wonder if maybe like partway through Vegapunk's message, Mars will actually find the Den Mushi and end up cutting off part of the broadcast. I don't think it would be enough to truly dampen the blow that Vegapunk's trying to deliver, but it might give Oda a means of cutting him off from saying too much because, at the end of the day, the true reveal of the Void Century in the past really, I think, is going to be delivered to us from Robin. This is, of course, though, if the transmission is even coming from Egghead, and I still like to think it's not, just because of how smart Vegapunk is. But it's also possible that he didn't predict his death with enough time to actually move the transmission off the island. Now, he does have teleporting technology, warping technology. We saw this at the beginning of Egghead, but we don't really know how far that can go. So there is a good chance that the broadcast has to be somewhere on the island because that was the best way for Vegapunk to set it up, and that he has just selected the best possible hiding space he could think of. Now I want to cut over and talk about Sanji a little bit, and I really like the Sanji-Venus matchup. This is kind of going to connect to what I mentioned before, which makes me think that Zoro might encounter Mars. Now I can see these enemies being flipped by the end of the story, because I really do think that Venus Juro is a Zoro opponent at the end. And I think that Mars would make a really good Sanji opponent because they're both aerial fighters. So it could be really cool and interesting to see this matchup flipped on Egghead and see a little bit about how Sanji would fare against Venus, which we're already getting some of, and to see how Zoro would fare against Mars, which I really think we might get some of. But I do also want to bring up that I feel it's important for the Gorosei to get some wins. Like, I do like seeing our group doing so well. We have Oimo and Kashi and Bonnie triple teaming Venus, which I do think he's going to escape from, giving Sanji more time to shine. But, I really want the Gorosei to be competent in imposing villains alongside Imu. Even if, let's say, they're not the true end game final bosses, because there's really, this could go two ways, right? Imu could be the final boss, or Blackbeard could be the final boss. It's really, I think the story is set up to where either one of those directions could be well written. But even if they're not the final opponents, even if they're just one step below, I really like good villains. I think that good villains are important to a story because it's just that much more satisfying and cathartic when the good guys beat them. So again, as much as I love seeing our crew and our team doing really well against the Gorosei, like, I want them to be imposing and not keep getting clowned on for the rest of the arc and end up getting some kind of dub by the end. And then, of course, the elephant in the room is the One Piece world sinking, right? Now, I guess that ever since the Noah was introduced into the story, this sort of outcome was already being hinted at, because that's clearly like a direct reference to Noah's Ark, and Noah's Ark is involved in a story that takes place with the world flooding, right? So I really think that the Noah in One Piece was probably created because this sort of thing maybe happened in the past too, or there was a chance this sort of thing was going to happen in the past, and so Joy Boy or whoever had the Noah built had a feeling that this might happen. And this raises some other interesting things that I've been starting to think about now, which one of them is Zunisha. Like, Zunisha is huge. Even if the world flooded, there's no way that the water level would reach Zunisha, right? Zunisha would probably just be walking through it as easily as it is now, which means that Zou is one of the places that would be protected. And this sort of makes me wonder, was there an actual island of Zou in the past that's now sunk? And for some reason they had to relocate to Zunisha? Or did they relocate to Zunisha before it was sunk because they knew this was coming? It's also possible they were always on there, but, you know, Zunisha is an area that wouldn't be affected by this. It also does make me suspect that Shanks knows about this future, which he probably learned from Roger, because something I'm now thinking about is how none of his crew are Devil Fruit users. Devil Fruit users would be at a huge disadvantage in a totally flooded world, right? You know, and this is stark contrast to Blackbeard's crew, who's all Devil Fruit users. So it's possible that Shanks, I think it's highly likely, actually, that Shanks knew this was coming, and one of the ways he was preparing for it was assembling a crew exclusively without Devil Fruits. I also am kind of starting to think that, like, what if the discrimination against the fishmen has nothing to do with them being fishmen or being viewed as fish or whatever the celestial dragons are saying, but it has something to do with just how immune and maybe even powerful or advantageous they would be in a world that was totally flooded. Like, the race that would probably be the best off here is the fishmen. And it's possible that if they all, like, came together in such a world, they could really turn the tide against whoever was trying to do it. And so I sort of wonder if maybe the fishmen are more feared than we think. And that stems from this outcome that this is all presuming that the world government is trying, or the world government, the celestial dragons, Emu, are the ones who are trying to flood the world, right? So it would be that group that perhaps to some extent is afraid of the fishmen and what they might be able to do in such a world. This is especially true for Shirahoshi, Poseidon, who has control of the Sea Kings. Now, how would this be achieved? Right now, and this is maybe just the too obvious answer, but sometimes the most obvious answers are also the right ones. But right now, what I'm leaning towards is that it's going to be caused by Emu's weapon, which is powered by the Mother Flame. And this is just because when we saw Emu nuke Lucia, one of the side effects of that was the water level rising all over the world. And so if this great cleansing ended up being Emu just nuking island after island after island with this weapon, which I think has a chance of being Uranus, the ancient weapon Uranus, because that's the only one that we don't really even know anything about. So we know that Pluton is underneath Wano, And we know that Shirahoshi is Poseidon. So we're aware of those two, but we just don't know anything about Uranus. Now, this does make me think, and I've said this before, that the world government is going to continue working with York because they need a Vegapunk to help make the Mother Flame. And this is something I kind of like about the satellites of Vegapunk, is the fact that it allows his genius to be split to both sides, right? Like, we could have the good satellites, like let's take Lilith as an example, or Edison, right? Or even Atlas, whatever one survive, could end up on the Straw Hat side, or with the Giants, or with the Grand Fleet somewhere. And then we have York, the traitor, ending up with the world government. Even if this isn't what Vegapunk would want, I do think it's a good way to keep him active in the story, but also like kind of balance it out as well, right? And this does make me think that Punk Records needs to stick around. So I think, as it was laid out in the beginning of Egghead, one of the goals is to preserve Punk Records. I do think that this is going to happen, that Punk Records is going to be preserved, and that regardless of what side it falls under, all of the satellites still alive are going to be able to access and use it, maybe even if they're not syncing like the way it works now. And then my last thought is kind of like, this kind of goes both ways, you know, like you'll see what I mean soon, but like, what if the water level rising isn't caused by Imu's weapon and may not even be the true ultimate bad outcome? And it maybe has something to do with the red line, right? Because I have long since subscribed to the theory that the red line will be destroyed. Got to bring the celestial dragons down somehow. And because we know when Imu destroyed Lucia, like I said before, the water level rose. So imagine if something as big as the red line were destroyed. That could raise the water levels by a lot. Though a counterpoint to this is that it's also possible that the red line being destroyed is the thing that's going to balance the world's water back out, right? So maybe it's already flooded, then the red line gets destroyed, and then that's what balances out the water and brings all the islands back. So this was just my little bit of discussion for this week's chapter. Regardless of what happens, I'm really excited to see where Egghead goes. And I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. I'd love to chat more with you all and hear other ideas and just talk more about the Egghead Island arc and One Piece in general. And with that, I hope that you all have an excellent rest of your day.